Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video requested by a viewer. It's called The Template Institute, Prologue, Antares Confederacy, Stellaris Invicta Season 2. Now, I already watched the Greater Terran Union. If you guys want to watch that reaction, I'll put the card right up here. Just click on it and you'll be able to access it. Okay, let's start. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Within the pages of the monumental work known as Ab Urbe Condita Libri, from the founding of the city, the Roman chronicler Titus Livius tells of a moment in the history of his empire when despair threatened to take hold in the heart of every citizen. Rome had been ravaged by the armies of the Gauls, and in the ruins of their capital, the Senate held a solemn meeting. They were faced with the difficult decision of whether to stay and rebuild, or flee for lands untouched by war. After untold hours of debate, the Senate seemed inclined to abandon Rome, and even the objections of Marcus Furius Camillus, the dictator whose legions had liberated the city, could not sway them. But in the last few moments before the vote was called, it is said a nameless Roman centurion, unaware of the debate, marched his column towards the gathered Senate and, feeling weary, uttered a single order to his men. His words struck with the divine weight of providence, and the Senate heard in them an omen from the gods that could not be ignored. They voted unanimously, ushering in the second founding of Rome. It was 2,549 years later, almost to the day, that the order first issued by that Roman centurion would be uttered again. The assembled captains of a lost host of humanity, trapped by circumstances entirely different than those faced by the Roman senators of antiquity, yet with consequences entirely familiar, held a solemn meeting. They were to determine whether to stay and rebuild, or set forth blindly into the unknown. Again, perhaps with a sense of irony, those words were spoken, and again the man who spoke them had little appreciation for their weight, or what effect they would have on his people throughout the coming centuries. But those words were said all the same, and like the Senate before, the assembled captains voted unanimously, and like before, they ushered the founding of a new nation. That single Latin phrase is today inscribed on the foundation of the Antares Parliament, the center of a growing power born from the determination of disparate peoples and cultures from every corner of the earth. It speaks of struggle, of hardship, of loss, and the great common power of humanity to not only endure, but thrive, regardless of circumstance. It was long ago pronounced amidst the ruins of Rome, repeated millennia later in the cargo bay of a colony ship, and is today held as the guiding words of the Confederate Republics of Antares. Hic manebimus optime. Here we will remain most excellently. The Earhart colonization program was the culmination of a century of arduous progress. The experiments with the first rudimentary wormhole generators, the construction of the orbital gate network, even the establishment of the international alliance meant to oversee their use, each had been a painstaking process in their own right.
Okay, I don't know how advanced this Earth civilization is in this video, but like in Stellaris, it takes some time before you can get warp gates and you can travel to other points. Well, you can travel through wormholes, so I think that's what they're also using here. Um, but I know it takes time before you can reach that level of technology. So I find it quite odd that only now, or should I say, they're developing it. The technology is so fast. And is this based on like a civilization that's going to rebel on Earth? Like they're gonna be trying to make their own state or something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure yet. But I know in Stellaris, once you have an empire and one of your colony worlds wants independence, they're going to revolt. And, if you don't have enough military personnel on the planet, then they take over and it becomes a new country. I'm wondering if that's how it's going to head out. So, yeah, let's continue.
But all were in the service of the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man had ever embarked. It was at first purely an act of faith and vision, for in spite of all the models and estimates, it was impossible to truly predict what benefits might await. Impossible until the whole of humanity witnessed the flag of a united Earth raised upon the surface of another world. The colonization of Alpha Centauri was difficult, as was Sirius, Tau Ceti, and Epsilon Indi. Each had their own respective eccentricities, and none of the first off-world colonies were truly amenable to human settlement. They were destined to instead be research outposts, mining sites, or test beds for future expeditions. But the discoveries within the Antares binary system changed everything. Hidden in the outer orbit of the system's fainter, smaller star, a planet was found. It seemed to invite human habitation, with an atmosphere and environment only slightly dissimilar from that of Earth itself. Life, evolutionarily simple as it might be, had already flourished there, and it seemed likely that mankind might as well. The first pioneers to arrive were jubilant in their reports. The first outposts performed flawlessly. Antares, therefore, would be the natural candidate for humanity's first large-scale, off-world settlement. For decades, Antares was prepared, crops planted, infrastructure built, and plans laid. 6 million souls departed Earth's orbit on March 1st, 2159. The Earhart Flotilla was the largest ever constructed, carrying not only scientists, engineers, and specialists, but their families. They were to be the second wave of colonists, and Antares eagerly awaited them. The ships entered the artificial wormhole without incident, and the peculiarities of interstellar travel meant it was weeks before Earth learned the first scheduled check-in had been missed. This was not entirely unexpected. No two transits were identical, but with every subsequent attempt at contact returning only static, hope fell into despair. Without resupply, the flotilla could survive for no more than 6 months. It is a testament to human optimism that attempts to...
Okay, the story is not going the way I thought it was going. I thought they were going to rebel on this planet, but it doesn't seem like that's gonna happen here. Okay, now it's kind of sounding like the Commonwealth of Man. If you guys play Stellaris, you know what I'm talking about. The Commonwealth of Man also was born out of colony ships that were heading out into space, and they were going to their intended planet, but somehow their navigational systems went haywire and they ended up in the middle of nowhere. So I think it's something similar to that. Yeah.
Reach them only ended after 5 times that. With the loss of the Earhart Flotilla, the passion and enthusiasm that had defined the colonization era quietly vanished, and all future efforts cancelled. The disaster was blamed on previously undiscovered instabilities within the gate network, and there was some comfort in the knowledge that those on board the flotilla likely never had a chance to realize that something had gone wrong. Statues were built and choirs sung to the 6 million lost sons and daughters of Earth, and the world tried to move on. Yet far across the universe, the pioneers of the Earhart Flotilla were very much alive. In place of the thriving colony meant to welcome them, and all its accompanying orbital infrastructure, supply networks, and communication relays, they had emerged within an entirely silent, entirely unknown star system. Instead of the dual suns of Antares, the new system had 3, each orbited by a great many planets and moons. Shrouding them all was a miasma of ionized gases, a beautiful, all-encompassing swirl of colors. It was a vast alien wilderness beyond anything previously discovered. Attempts to identify where they now were in relation to Earth or Antares all failed. No recognizable constellations were found, no frame of reference identified. In a single moment, their dreams had been dashed, and every soul aboard had to reconcile with the knowledge that they would never arrive at their intended destination. Without a warp gate, they were stuck. There even existed the possibility, however unlikely, that they had traveled not only through space, but through time, and might be hundreds or even thousands of years into the past or future. No evidence of this could be found, but the possibility remained. Realization, grief, and fear threatened to overwhelm the flotilla, but there was simply no time. They could operate for 6 months without resupply, and every second wasted might mean the difference between the life and death of 1, a dozen, or even thousands of people. Within the first day of their arrival, when every hope of returning to Earth had been extinguished, a new plan was set in motion. Under the hastily prepared Operation Longshot, thousands of automated probes were sent across the system, identifying potential locations for human settlement. Before even the first results had been returned, the flotilla frantically moved to reorganize itself. Everything aboard each ship, from the enormous next-generation atmospheric processors and gravitational tethers, to the farming equipment and industrial machinery, all the way down to individual colonists, seeds, and gallons of water, had been the result of decades of planning. It was a triumph of logistics and administration on a scale beyond even the Martian settlements, the War of the 5 Cities, the Apollo landings, or the Schlieffen Plan. An army of officials had planned how the flotilla would be stockpiled down to the last spare tire, and in an instant, it had all been undone. Even if a verdant paradise was discovered within the system, the flotilla's population was too large to be supported by a single settlement. Combined with the risks of alien diseases, natural disasters, or potentially even hostile animal life, it was decided that the flotilla would be scattered. Dozens of smaller colonies, dispersed across multiple sites, it was hoped, would be better suited to survive whatever dangers might await. What this meant was that supplies and equipment concentrated on a select few, or even on single ships, had to be distributed across the whole of the flotilla. One fleet had to be turned into many. Under normal circumstances, selecting a site for future colonization might take decades. Soil needed to be tested, the atmosphere carefully analyzed, and plate tectonics studied. Tens of thousands of factors had to be considered, all of which took time that the rapidly decentralizing flotilla could not afford. When the last of the information had been relayed by the automated probes, the decision of where to settle would have to be made purely on whatever data they had managed to gather. While the probes had not recorded the existence of any paradise world, the nightmare scenario had also not come to pass. If the entire trinary system was home only to toxic worlds and dead moons, then the flotilla would be left to die in space. As if acting on their prayers, the system was home to a number of worlds, which, like Antares, were home to flourishing, if evolutionarily simple, life. 19 sites were selected across 8 planets scattered between each of the system's 3 stars. The size of these sites, and the number of resources, colonists, and ships allocated to each one, varied considerably. Some sites encompassed entire continents, assigned hundreds of thousands of people, while others consisted of only a few scattered islands, intended to support only tens of thousands. Nor was the nature of these sites equal. From even the sparse details relayed back to the flotilla, it was clear some...
Yeah, these guys were just so unlucky. And lucky. So imagine like you land on the planet and after a few days you just become sick. You don't know why, but somehow you got infected by the local viruses or some sort of diseases that are on the planet. And what if you land on a planet that one day it becomes extremely hot and then another day it becomes extremely cold? Like you can't farm in that kind of situation. You can't build any kind of proper structures in that kind of situation where the weather is, you know, either on one side of the extreme ends or both sides at the same time, you know. And what if you land on a planet that's got very uh, dangerous animals, fauna and flora life, you know? So these guys really, they were taking chances here, and they had no choice. They couldn't all stay in one, you know, colony and support that. They had to separate the resources and the people to make sure that they all have a better chance of survival. But luckily, there are so many worlds, and hopefully, there will be some survivors from this catastrophe.
Take a much greater effort to be made habitable. Without any opportunity for last goodbyes or ceremonies, small groups of ships split away from the main flotilla and set course for what would become their new home. Each left with only the hope that what they had aboard would be enough for them to survive in their memories of a world called Earth. In the final meeting of the Earhart leadership, representatives from each of the 19 sites made a pledge. While it was not the home they had expected, it was the one they had been given. In a unanimous decision, they declared the star system would be named Antares, and no matter how long it might take to overcome the fate rested upon them, one day, the pioneers of Antares would find one another, and together, whether in body or in spirit, head once more into the unknown. At first, several of the 19 sites remained in contact with one another. Gradually, however, the effort required to overcome the system's unique stellar interference and maintain the connection grew too strenuous. Goodbyes were said, and power reallocated to where it was better spent. Each of the 19 sites struggled in isolation. Some, in time, managed to overcome their new environment, transforming their colony ships into the centers of new, emergent nations. Others had to fight for decades simply to get their crops to grow or find clean water to drink. A few did everything they could to survive, only to learn that it would not be enough. Slowly, the first satellites were sent back into orbit, and contact was re-established across moons and across stars. Finally, 149 years after landing, the pioneers of Antares established regular contact with one another. The reunification was bittersweet, as the full picture of what had happened began to take form. Of the 19 original sites, 11 had survived. Of the fallen 8, 2 had starved, 4 had succumbed to disease, 1 had frozen, 1 had flooded, while the fate of the last was sealed. Among the surviving sites, the level of success varied considerably. A few nations had just barely managed to survive and would be reliant on outside help to truly thrive. Others had developed into one or sometimes several nation-states. Reunion Day was celebrated and honored across the system, but despite their common heritage, the sense of fellowship that had existed across the Earhart flotilla had been greatly eroded within the nations of Antares. In an idealistic attempt to remedy this, on the 3rd annual Reunion Day, a new institution was created, the Antares Assembly. This forum was an intergovernmental attempt to maintain peace, security, and a new united Antares. Political friction grew nearly immediately.
Okay, so in the solar system, they created their own federation and their own galactic community. If you play Stellaris, you understand what I'm saying.
Several of the system's most powerful nations began maneuvering to assume the mantle of leadership. Mutually beneficial trade spiraled into opportunism and the establishment of rival trade blocs. Within a decade of Reunion Day, the Assembly's 3 largest nations, the Federation of Jut Farid, the Republic of Retiva, and the Republic of Chenkatai, had each established their own supranational unions. The Association of Antares Nations, the Antares Community, and a Rico Pact each competed for political clout, attempting to win over the other nations of Antares. While the benefits of each alliance were considerable, The increasing tensions between the three only served to frustrate and alienate many of the neutral nations they were attempting to influence. On March 1st, 164 AL, the Republic of Maltawan, the Republic of Sabmadi, the Free State of Sagallo, and the Union of Thanjanal established the non-aligned movement of Antares. Unlike the unions backed by the system's superpowers, the language which defined the non-aligned movement was clear and concise, promising mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, non-interference in domestic affairs, and most importantly, equality and mutual benefit. The non-aligned movement quickly became the largest within the system, leading to the eventual termination of its three major competitors. By 189 AL, Jut Farid, Retiva, and Chengatai had become the last major holdouts, and compared to the increasingly gridlocked Antares Assembly, the non-aligned movement had begun introducing sweeping laws and reforms that promised to further integrate its member nations. On September 4th, 191 AL, the last three holdouts were unofficially accepted into the non-aligned movement, which, as a face-saving measure, was immediately dissolved. Instead, the Antares Assembly underwent a complete reform, adopting both the structure, laws, and decorum of the non-aligned movement. Veto power and other benefits enjoyed by its largest nations were likewise removed from the institution. With Jut Farid, Retiva, or Chengatai no longer able to impede the decisions made by the Assembly, the first real talks of a system.
Okay, can I just say that I love the images that they're showing here. It actually makes me imagine this Antares Confederacy, just like the Greater Terran Union, how they also show these images and the buildings and the society and everything. It just makes me imagine these empires. So I have to give 100 marks to these artistic images.
System-wide unification began. The establishment of a centralized sovereign state, with the nations of Antares reduced to subnational entities, or even eliminated entirely, was seen as the most efficient option, but one that lacked the necessary political support. Only the smaller, poorer nations, those which would benefit the most from this arrangement, seriously considered it. Instead, a compromise was reached and a system created that would wield considerable power in dealing with interstellar affairs, yet leave domestic issues in the hands of its constituent states. The Antares Assembly was officially dissolved on April 22nd, 202 AL. Simultaneously, the Confederate Republics of Antares were formally established, and Confederation Day celebrated across the system. It was both praised and criticized as being very different from the union that had been first imagined in the final meeting of the Erhard Flotilla. While certainly endowed with the potential to unify the star system, it also allowed its 11-member nation.
This sounds like the United Nations in a way, you know. We have this global government that has no power, that is just a talk shop in a way, you know, because all the nations are still independent, all the nations are still, you know, having their own domestic affairs that are controlled by the people. And we have this umbrella organization that is the United Nations, just like with the Antares Confederacy. They have all these federated states that are all under this arching umbrella, but the umbrella doesn't have any power to control domestic affairs. Yeah. I don't know if I really like it.
The implicit right of succession. A parliamentary confederacy, the authority of the government is today mainly limited to interstellar development and discovery, foreign affairs, and defense. Its ability to interfere in the affairs of its republics is limited and addressed in a slightly vague general welfare clause within its constitution. The Confederation's executive office is headed by a prime minister, who also serves as the head of state, but whose authority is relatively weak. This individual likewise serves as the head of the Cabinet of Ministers, which acts as the federal executive governing body of the Confederacy. There is no fixed term of office, nor any kind of term limit, and a Prime Minister can remain in office so long as they maintain the confidence of the majority Antares Parliament. There is an informal tradition dating back to the non-aligned movement, however, that a government must call an election once every 4 years. Major political power within the Confederacy is instead held by the Parliament of the Confederate Republics of Antares, or simply the Antares Parliament. A bicameral legislature, it has 2 separate chambers, an upper house known as the Senate, and a lower house called the Chamber of Representatives. The Senate is composed of 5 representatives from each constituent republic and appointed by the Prime Minister. There are few qualifications to become a senator, only that the individual is not beholden to economic vagaries or turmoil, and a citizen of the republic they've been chosen to represent. In comparison to the Chamber of Representatives, whose members are apportioned to the republics by population size, and is therefore seen as representing the population, the intent of the Senate is to act as the voice of the republics. While officially the upper house of Parliament, it is first only in order of precedence for the purposes of protocol. As a matter of both practice and custom, it is the Chamber of Representatives that is dominant within Parliament, and to whom the Prime Minister is solely responsible. While legislation can be introduced by either house, the Senate is meant to act as a place of sober second thought. The approval of both houses is necessary for legislation, but the Senate has only rejected on average 2 bills per year in its short history. The Chamber of Representatives is, in contrast to the Senate, a democratically elected body. There are currently 809 members, with this number expected to increase with the total population of the Confederacy. Seats within the chamber are distributed roughly in proportion to the population of each republic.
Okay, I have to point this out that this form of government is something you would see in the real world as we know it, in terms of democracies, where it's a bottom up, government structure system, unlike in the Greater Terran Union where it's top bottom government structure, where the executive is having complete and utter control over the entire nation, while in the Antares Confederacy it's the legislative body in terms of the Antares National Assembly that has more authority and more power than the executive branches of the government. So, yeah.
The Antares Constitution, however, contains several provisions regarding this method of representation, and as a result, there is some regional malapportionment relative to the total population. Such clauses are everywhere within the Constitution, intended to balance the will of the people with the power of the republics. This means that the efficiency of the Antares government is always in a state of flux, with both the republics and people able to disrupt legislation, yet not always enough to approve it. Backhand deals and a variety of committees, both official and unofficial, have become the preferred method of passing legislature, and the outcome of most votes is almost always known before they are brought to the floor.
This is definitely Earth 2.0. Version 2.0. Yeah, they're also having corruption. They're also having, what do they call them? Not AIDS. What do they call those people? Those people who are always pushing new policies by using money and, corruption tactics and backhand deals and shadow state government kind of stuff. What do they call them, man? I forgot what they call those kind of people. The lobbyists, yes, they have a lot of lobbyists who are making these deals, and when people enter into the assembly, it's just to rubber stamp that deal that they made in the smoke-filled rooms with cigars and alcohol and rich people and all that stuff. So yeah, it's very much like Earth in terms of its politics. You know, our Earth, not the Greater Terran Union, but our Earth.
Combined with a lack of history, tradition, and precedence, the Antares Parliament can be often chaotic and sometimes bordering on violent. Shouting matches have repeatedly erupted and are in danger of becoming routine. Together with the High Court of Antares, the office...
Just like on Earth, how parliaments are also becoming battlegrounds and WWE, SmackDown, Raw, you know, kind of fields of action.
of the Prime Minister and Parliament of Antares are all located in Sigalo, the capital city of Antares. While a city within the Republic of Avjari Vet, Sigalo exists as a distinct federal entity. While many of its constituent republics maintain their own official languages, none have been granted official status by the wider Confederacy. French, Arabic, Swahili, Spanish, and Vietnamese are most predominantly used in government affairs, while Russian, English, Standard Hindi, Portuguese, Mandarin Chinese, and Turkish are also occasionally used when dealing with specific republics. The Antares Constitution expressly prohibits the adoption of any official language, and this provision is unlikely to change in the immediate future. The same restrictions apply in adopting any kind of state religion. Islam is the largest faith across the republics of the Confederacy, followed closely by sizable Christian, Hindu, and atheist communities. The overwhelming desire to not favor any language or religion at the expense of any other is on the surface meant to place each republic on equal footing within the federal government. However, multiculturalism has emerged as a key part of every state within the Confederacy, the natural outcome of the flotilla's initial demographics. The Earhart Flotilla consisted mainly of settlers from Africa, Central and Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, Oceania, and South America, the regions generally left out of the first wave of colonists. In an attempt to force genetic diversity, these populations were deliberately intertwined once the flotilla arrived in the system, and their survival across successive generations was in doubt. As a result, the modern nations of the Confederacy are uniquely culturally and ethnically diverse. While intolerance and domestic tensions have not been eliminated entirely and remain a major problem in several of the republics, the Confederation's constitution aims to foster further integration, even at the expense of political efficiency. These quirks in the Constitution have resulted in some strange, seemingly contradictory practices. This is nowhere more apparent than in the organization of the Confederate military. Divided into two major branches, the Confederate Navy and Confederate Army, major restrictions exist in how both these services must be raised and deployed within the Antares system. The Confederate Navy is the nation's space warfare branch. While many of the republics operate their own orbital branches, the Navy is the only institution within the Confederacy permitted to operate warships of a specific size and capabilities. As a matter of law, however, the federal government is forbidden to independently construct or order the construction of these warships. Every ship in the fleet is in practice one that has been donated by individual republics. By contrast, while...
Okay, that's interesting. However, who upholds these laws? You know, that a federated state can build the ships, but they cannot operate them. Or the Confederacy can operate the ships, but they cannot build the ships. Who monitors that kind of divisions of power and responsibilities? It's interesting. I like the idea. I do.
The republics are legally allowed to construct such warships, they are prohibited from operating them. While such an arrangement has the potential to cripple the Confederate Navy in times of crisis, such laws are mostly ceremonial, and the federal government has on numerous occasions placed unofficial orders for warships, which are then serendipitously constructed and donated by various republics. The same kind of restrictions have been placed on the Confederate Army, which for all its history has been comprised of only a select few administrative and logistics personnel. It exists mainly theoretically, as the Confederate Army is barred from operating on any territory administered by the Republics, leaving essentially nowhere within the star system where the branch would be allowed to mobilize. The lack of any armed conflict across the entirety of the Antares system's history has left little necessity for such a force, and even the Republics themselves maintain only small, garrison forces, not suited to offensive operations. In the event of war, the Confederate government has the authority to call for volunteers, but not to enact conscription, which remains the sole right of the Republics. Any division granted to the Confederacy would be both raised and equipped by their respective republics, and how such a command structure might fare in wartime remains a matter of concern. Many fear that individual republics might leverage the deployment of any divisions raised in an attempt to guide national strategy. The need for military forces at all remains a matter of contention within Parliament. While nations on Earth had detected seemingly artificial broadcasts of repeating mathematical patterns, unequivocal proof of alien life had not yet been found at the time of the Earhart flotilla's departure, much less the desire to defend against such threats. The ardent will to maintain military forces by both the leadership of constituent republics and the Confederacy is often baffling to the general populace, which has rarely supported such measures. What has never been revealed, however, is that a small part of the founding myth of Antares has been built on a lie. When the Earhart flotilla was to have emerged in their intended destination, they were to have received 8 scheduled messages from Earth, each containing only trivial details concerning items that might have changed during transit. The colonists were informed that these messages never arrived, lost during whatever anomaly threw them off course. But in truth, the Earhart flotilla received all 8, and at least 100 others. Broadcasts not intended for them, but somehow received by the flotilla all the same. Most were scrambled and garbled, impossible to truly understand, but the small number that have been restored are terrifying. Few have seen them, only the highest military and government officials of the Republics and the Confederacy. But even the most resolute pacifist among them have been forced to agree that a standing army might be necessary. The Confederate Republics of Antares is still a young nation, one faced with a daunting challenge. Over 2 centuries ago, their ancestors left Earth for a new home, only to unexpectedly arrive in another. For all the division between the republics and the apparent weakness of the Confederacy, the will and desire to seek out Earth has never wavered. On the foundation of the Antares Parliament and countless other buildings and institutions across the star system are etched the words, Hic manebimus optime. Here we will remain most excellently. It was spoken first within the Senate of the Roman Empire, again within the cargo bay of a colony ship within the Earhart flotilla, and is today the guiding words of the Antares Confederacy. The flags of 11 republics speak to the fortitude, courage, and spirit needed in the pursuit of those words. The graves of 8 colonies speak to the necessity of sacrifice to live, fight, and if need be, die in the pursuit of those words. And the emblem of one nation speaks to the spirit of the human race to embrace cooperation, mutual respect, and a resolute spirit in the pursuit of those words, not only when it is easy, but when it is hard. Today, as the citizens of the Confederacy look outward, not only to one another, but past the boundaries of their star system, that phrase has taken on a new meaning, and one small addition. Here, we will remain most excellently, but not here alone.
In Stellaris Invicta, the Templin Institute guides the Antares Confederacy into an uncertain future, one you can influence. Every Saturday, we'll live stream our progress on our Twitch channel, and our viewers and patrons will have the opportunity to vote on decisions and shape the history of the galaxy. If you missed the live stream, you can catch up on what happened when the stream is published the next day to the Templin archives. Then, once a month, we'll produce a video like this one, detailing everything that's progressed in the Confederacy's struggle to return to Earth. The first live stream of Stellaris Invicta Season 2 begins 1 hour after this video went live.
Okay guys, that was the Antares Confederacy. It's a very decentralized, government. The Federation members or the Federation states all control their own internal affairs, and the national or the Federation government doesn't have any authority over those individual republics. And the military, it's so complicated in terms of how the state procures vessels from the federated members, and how the military forces are also conscripted, into the military force of the Federation. Sorry, I'm still thinking about a lot of things in my head right now. But yeah, it's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of checks and balances that needs to be examined and ticked and reevaluated before anything ever gets done. There's a lot of things that you have to go through. And what I don't really like about the Confederacy is that, what if one of the nations have laws that are against human rights, or that are very, what's the word I'm looking for? Are intolerant of different cultures, different religions, different races, different languages. What if there's one bad nation out there that doesn't subscribe itself to this confederation of unity and prosperity, all togetherness and all that stuff? And because the Confederacy cannot really intervene into the internal politics of a particular nation, they must all be left to their own devices. So what happens in that kind of situation? Do they just sit by and watch it happen and say that it's not our problem, we can't do anything about it as the federal government? We have to stay back and let them deal with their own internal issues. What if, but they did say they have a federal court, but how much of a jurisdiction and how much reach does that court have on these independent federal nations? So that's also a concern for me. That's one of the reasons why I didn't necessarily like the fact that they were so strongly independent from the central government. And I think I wanted the central government to have at least a bit more strength in terms of the overarching laws that govern the nation. Like the constitution of the Confederacy must be applied to each and every single federation world. So in terms of like human rights, it must be applied to all of them. There can't be one federated state to be, separate from everything else that's going on in the Confederacy. So yeah, it's a lot of work to maintain the Antares Confederacy. It's a lot of work. What I do also like is that, they have the bottom-up kind of government where the national legislature, or what do they call it? I forgot what they called it right now. But yeah, the national legislature has more power compared to the executive. The executive has to report, has to account to the national legislature almost 100% of the time. They can't do anything without their support. So that's what I like about it as well. And also limiting the jurisdiction of the executive on the federal worlds. It's a delicate balance, you know, it's a delicate situation that I think maybe the executive needs to have a bit more assertive power on the federal nations, because like I said before, what if there's a rogue nation out there, you know, one that's domestic politics have just turned for the worst and their people are now becoming these racist, crazy people, you know, doing these religious fundamental kind of supremacy kind of things, and the national government can't do anything about it because the laws prohibit them to interfere into national politics or into local politics on that planet. So I think maybe the national government should have a bit more power, maybe as like an emergency measure, just in case. And I think they should also redraw on the responsibilities of the executive in terms of procuring warships and military personnel, because, you know, they're not alone in space. There's other alien civilizations out there, and most of them are not going to be, you know, friendly and peaceful. Some of them are going to want to conquer the Antares Confederacy. And if they are not ready, if they're still squabbling in their parliaments, you know, deciding whether they should give this amount to the Federation or that amount to the Federation, then they've got problems. They've got serious problems. So yeah, it was interesting. It was really interesting. And guys, I guess that's it for the prologue for the Antares Confederacy. Remember, if you want me to watch the episodes that are, you know, available on the Templin Institute about the Antares Confederacy, please comment below, and then I'll make some time in my reaction schedules to watch the Antares Confederacy. But first I want to watch the Greater Terran Union, and then I'll come to the Confederacy next. And yeah, if you guys want to watch my previous reaction to the Greater Terran Union, remember that the card is right at the top. Just click on it and you'll be able to access it. If you like the video, give me a like, comment and subscribe to my channel. Also click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And I guess I'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.